January 1st, 2025. And this is my first spaces, my first live spaces session. So I'm hoping we can have some fun today. Can anybody hear me? If people can hear me, please let me know. And bear with me. I'm going to try to not make this session too painful as I kind of figure out how to let people be speakers and move around and get to say what they want to say. So let's see here. Shows that nobody is present just yet. So maybe I'll give it a few minutes. Anyway, so I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna talk and we'll go from there. So my name is Parviz Malakouti Fitzgerald. I'm a mobility attorney, and I wanted to get on this spaces to have an open discussion, kind of about the value of dual citizenship. Get into some of the deeper concepts, basically. First of all, it's really cool to see in recent years so many people starting to understand and the benefit of multiple citizenship, of different visas, different residencies. Much more talk about flag theory, perpetual travel theory, etc. And I see a lot of superficial level conversation about these concepts, which is cool. It's better than nothing. But I don't really see that much, discussion about exactly, the deeper concepts. What are the aspects of a citizenship that matter? What about the concept of robustness of citizenship? How strong is a citizenship benefit? Is there a difference in robustness of citizenship based off of how you get it, whether you get it by naturalization or acquisition at birth, or if you get citizenship by investment or by descent? Are they all equally robust? I think they're not. That's something that I want to talk about in among other topics in this spaces. I see we got Patrick here. What's up, Patrick? So anybody who wants to speak, I think you have to send me a message, or I think you have to press speaker, and I'll let you speak. This is an open discussion. Like I said, anybody can talk about whatever they want here, and we'll just have an open conversation. So I'll just kick it off with basically my ideas, how I view the benefit and the way that's kind of makes sense in terms of looking at dual citizenship. So, first of all, I say I have a few mottos. One of my mottos is freedom of movement is the answer. And then also a variation on that, which is freedom of movement by multiple citizenship is the answer. And the reason that that's kind of my motto is, well, there's a few reasons. First of all, I say freedom of movement because I actually believe that the highest benefit, the highest level of freedom actually comes more in the ability to move, the freedom of movement, as opposed to the actual movement itself. And that's something that I'll talk more about. I believe that it's the ability to leave or enter or go that actually matters the most, rather than whether you're actually exercising it in that moment or not. So that's the first aspect. And then the multiple citizenship part. Why do I say multiple citizenship? Well, obviously, there's different ways of increasing a person's freedom of movement. You can get a visa, you can get a temporary residency, a permanent residency, you can get another citizenship. I believe that, well, first of all of them increase a person's freedom of movement. They're all fantastic, better than nothing. But if I had to distill down to what I think is the biggest impact, what's the biggest delta, the most impactful delta of all of these, mobility assets, I would say I believe that it's the move from being a single citizen to being a dual citizen. I think that has the biggest impact on a person's robust freedom of movement, because I believe that that's the genesis of choice in freedom of movement. Once you've become citizen of a second country, now you have highest right of entry, stay, access in that second country, and you actually have the first realistic practicality, the realistic possibility of renouncing that first citizenship that you have, which is opt out from the previous system. So one citizenship to two citizenships, in my opinion, that is the biggest. That's the biggest delta in terms of the impact on a person's freedom and freedom of movement. 2 to 3 is great, but still a diminished return. 3 to 4, great, of course, a further diminished return, so on and so on. The other thing, basically, that I kind of wanted to talk about is, we have so many different disparate pieces of information about citizenship benefit that we talk about, we hear about. Probably the most common one is visa-free access. What's the passport strength? How many countries can you travel to visa-free on a given country citizenship? That's important. That definitely matters. I don't think it's the thing that matters the most, but my inquiry is, how do we order this information regarding benefits of citizenship as well as obligations of citizenship? How do we put order to it? Okay, so it's not just a million pieces, a million facts that are flying around that we're just talking about, from scratch. And so I have a few kind of heuristics that I use to help myself think about the benefits and obligations of citizenship, and I also use these for when I'm discussing with my clients, how I recommend that they think about these. And basically, what I do is, for benefits, I kind of split the benefits of citizenship into a few different categories. The first one is what I call the core freedom of movement benefits. Okay. This is basically, where does the citizenship allow you to go, stay? How immediate of a benefit does it give you for you to go and stay in those places? And how robust is that benefit that you have to go and stay in those places? By robustness, I mean basically resistance to degradation, whether it be by loss of the citizenship itself or loss of a benefit that comes with the citizenship. So those four aspects, goability, stayability, immediacy of benefit, and robustness of benefit. That's basically what I call the core freedom of movement benefits of a citizenship. But of course, there's way more than that. We have Patience is Alpha, of course, recently talking about some of these other benefits of citizenship, which are super important. They matter as well too. Access to a healthcare system, access to benefits that a person might get in another country by bilateral, multilateral treaty. These are all also really important as well. The way I basically look at these are, so we have the first level, core freedom of movement benefits. I also consider springboard freedom of movement benefits. To me, a springboard benefit of citizenship is a benefit that allows you, by virtue of citizenship A, to get some sort of ability to go, enter, naturalize quickly, something else in another country. So that's why I call it a springboard. Okay, so for example, you become citizen in, let's say you're I don't know, let's call you a Kenyan citizen. You get citizenship by descent in Slovakia. Slovakia is a member of the E2 treaty with the United States. You use that Slovak citizenship in order to apply for an E2 visa to come to the United States, E2 non-immigrant investor visa. That's what I would call a springboard benefit of Slovak citizenship, right? That person is using the benefit, the treaty between Slovakia and the United States. Slovakia is the springboard, the landing place is the United States. The biggest springboard benefit, of course, is visa-free travel, right? And this is something that I'm a firm believer is a benefit of citizenship, not passport. And I'll try not to harp on that too much in this spaces, but I really believe it's really important to understand that distinction and make that distinction. So visa-free access is also a springboard benefit. You basically, get one citizenship in order to get access to visit another country. So let me pause real quickly here. Does anybody want to be a speaker? All I see is listeners. Or can somebody tell me what I have to do in order do I have to do something to give others access to being to be a speaker? Hold on one second here. And bear with me here, please, guys and gals. Let's see here. Okay, I see I can invite people to speak. Okay. Oh, we got a request. All right. Boom. Patrick can now speak. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, cool. Anyway, Patrick, feel free to hop in whenever you want. Otherwise, I'm gonna keep going until people want to hop in and agree, disagree, piggyback, or whatever.
Yeah, that sounds good. This is my first time requesting space on spaces, so I'm gonna probably piggyback in a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. So anyway, going back, like I said, to the way that I try to give some order to the different benefits and drawbacks of second or third citizenship. I put the first category, core freedom of movement benefits. Second category, springboard benefits, right? So springboard benefits I define as a benefit that you get related to another country, a third country, by virtue of having that citizenship in the second country. And then I basically consider the non-freedom of movement benefits, right? These are some of the things that I was talking about that Patience is Alpha has been tweeting about recently, which is, getting, citizenship and then, gaining access to healthcare, cheaper healthcare in that system, or maybe tax benefits. Okay, by maybe becoming a citizen of a country that's member to a beneficial bilateral tax treaty. Possibly becoming citizen in a country that offers you some sort of other protection. Right. That's basically kind of the catch-all. These are benefits that don't have to do with what I consider freedom of movement, the stricter definition of freedom of movement. Where can you go? Literally, where can you pick up and physically go and stay, and enter and exit. So these are how I order, not order, but these are how I basically split up into different categories in my mind, how to think about different benefits of a second citizenship or a third citizenship. Now, on the other side, we have drawbacks, right? We have potential drawbacks and obligations. And these are things that, predictably, of course, in the industry, they're not discussed as much, right? Because I guess you're not going to really sell, you're not going to sell a citizenship or residency or visa as well by talking about the things you have to give up or the drawbacks. But obviously, it's important. It's a super important consideration. And in some cases, given drawbacks can be a deal breaker. So the way I think about the drawbacks is I split them roughly into two categories. Okay, so I think about drawbacks in terms of the drawbacks or the obligations that is going to affect the person only territorially in that country, meaning while they're there, versus extraterritorially imposed obligations, the latter category. And I consider the latter category to be more important, bigger red flags. Because an extraterritorial obligation that you pick up by becoming citizen in a country or becoming recognized as a citizen of a country, which is sometimes what happens in citizenship by descent, you don't naturalize, you're actually just becoming recognized as a citizen. Those obligations, they follow you wherever you go. It's not something that you can opt out of just by leaving the country. They follow you all around, right? So I published an article about 2 years ago with what I called the 4 red flags of second citizenship. These are the four obligations, and there's more than 4 for sure obligations you can pick up that are extraterritorial. But these are the ones that I consider kind of commonly occurring, important, and big things that people should consider. They are citizenship-based taxation, a country that has citizenship-based taxation, a country that imposes mandatory military service, a country that does not allow the person to renounce the citizenship, so doesn't allow the person to opt out. And then fourth, a country that is sanctioned heavily on an international scale, a country that has its citizens sanctioned. These are 4 obligations. I call them a red flag. Maybe I should have called them a yellow flag because I believe, and I wrote in my article, that the presence of one of these doesn't mean automatically you should not pick up that citizenship or naturalize. But it means you should slow down and research more, look into it more, consider more the extent to which picking up those obligations is going to hamstring basically what you want to do. Those are extraterritorially imposed obligations. So, like I said, that's what I consider most important when you're thinking about picking up a second or third citizenship, especially if you're not expecting to live full time in that other country, right? And I'll circle back to this and give some examples later, if people want to hear about it. First category, drawbacks that people consider, that really don't affect you that much if you're outside of the country. Okay, poor economy, strict societal rules, for example, I don't know, veiling requirement or something like that. Anything that has to do with domestically imposed law, to me, it seems pretty obvious that shouldn't be too much, if you're not living in the country, too much of a of a deterrent for a person to pick up a citizenship if they can get it. But it seems like, from the clients that I talk to and consults that I have and what I read online, that a lot of people don't really make this distinction between the obligations that are imposed territorially or extraterritorially. I find that this issue, or basically clarity of thinking on this issue, comes up very often in the context of citizenship by descent, especially when somebody has access to either naturalize by descent or be recognized as a citizen by descent of a country that's either a poor country, a third world country, or maybe a country that's, for example, a pariah in the West. I'm happy to mention my own example. I'm half Iranian, right? So I'm open about being an American citizen and also a citizen of Iran, right? I was born in the United States. There's plenty of people like me, okay? They're born in the United States to one or more Iranian parents or Syrian parents, Cuban parents, Venezuelan parents, etc. And some of them are faced with a decision, whether it be in childhood or in adulthood, about whether they want to, get citizenship by descent in that country. How do they think about whether they should do it? I believe that the best framework is the one that I mentioned, okay, which is basically consider what are the drawbacks, what are the drawbacks that are imposed territorially, meaning they don't affect you, or they don't affect you that much if you're not in that other country, and what are the drawbacks that are going to basically chase you around, wherever you go, wherever you live, right? Okay, well, let me take a look here, take a quick pause. I see John is here. Thanks for joining, John. John's live actually inspired me the other day because I saw that he did it. He did it for the first time. I had been putting off doing one for the first time myself, and I said, you know what, I got to bite the bullet and figure this out. Okay, we have no. Okay, anybody want to come up and speak? I got plenty. I'll rant on for an hour or two if given the chance, but be happy to hear other people's thoughts. Like I said, and by the way, disagreement, obviously, totally fine. Disagree in full, disagree in part. Let's come up and have an earnest conversation about what matters in dual citizenship and multiple citizenship, and how we make sense of the volume of information that's out there. Let's take a look here.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on kind of what you said. Um, I think that particularly recently, there's a very this illuminates kind of the obligations and a component of what you spoke to, and that is a lot of former Soviet countries from post fall of the Iron Curtain don't allow for dual citizenship, or they don't allow for dual citizenship specifically with Russia because they see the potential for that framework of dual citizenship to be either a security risk or like a potentially like a political coalition's risk. Um, I believe Latvia is was one of the Baltics that really kind of pushed this back in the day. It was either Latvia or Estonia. And recently, there is a bill currently in the Ukrainian legislator advocating for dual citizenship for those who are not Russian or do not have dual citizenship with Russia, which is pretty unique because transparently they're looking for one of those red flags, right? They're looking for someone who could potentially be conscripted. Um, different than conscription is different than mandatory military service. Like in practice, they kind of happen to be the same thing, but conscription is event driven as opposed to blanket policy. Like say for example, Israel has mandatory military service during a certain age demographic. Um, and I bring that up because I have had a few clients come to me. So, my name is Patrick. I'm a genealogist. I do citizenship by descent. I had a handful of clients come to me who have very loose claims to Polish, Romanian, Hungarian citizenship, but it's because their ancestors moved from those countries to Ukraine and then from Ukraine to the United States at some point in the 20th century. And so they all say, hey, technically, if, you know, I could get dual citizenship in Ukraine, I don't want to, but technically I could if this bill goes through. Um, and, then you have the conversation about how many obligations that would create. Ukraine is probably not going to be part of the EU or NATO in the near future. So there's like very limited benefits. And so then they say, okay, then they come to me and say, okay, I need to go 3 or 4 generations back to see if I can justify a different EU citizenship. And I think in comparing that dual citizenship framework between some of those countries, you really get to see some of these concepts of benefits. If you have a Polish citizenship, you're in the EU. That's a great piece to be. Will Poland need to conscript people in the next 10 years? That answer is going to be different for everyone in their political reading. But that's a far better discussion to have than say, oh, I might be eligible for Ukrainian citizenship in the near future if this current bill in the Ukrainian legislature passes. So, um, I think that as a historical example or as a current example looking at history rather really illuminates that citizenship from both a red flag and a benefit weighting perspective. So I'll leave it there because I'll get chatty and confusing if I stay on too long.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, good point about distinguishing between conscription and mandatory military service. Yeah, I would argue, unless the country that you're considering naturalizing in is currently in war, the mandatory military service is the more onerous obligation because you have to, in theory, you have to, pay it, no matter what. Typically, obviously, if you're a male, as well as potentially your descendants. Yeah, that's absolutely an issue. And then Patrick, you also just reminded me, kind of just as a side note, because of so many former Soviet, either members of the Soviet Union or kind of countries of Central and Eastern Europe did not allow for dual citizenship. We kind of got this fairly recent thing that came up in the last couple decades, which I call semi-citizenships, right? And these are basically statuses that give rights to descendants of former citizens, but without making them a citizen and not making them a permanent resident either. It's kind of like a bizarre little thing. And I think you know a little bit about this, Patrick, as well. Poland has the Pol card, the Karta Polaka. Lithuania has their certificate of Lithuanian descent. Slovakia has the Slovak living abroad certificate, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of obviously another outshoot of, I guess the politics of some countries being antagonistic to dual citizenship. And by the way, for anybody who might qualify for those, I recommend you get them. Again, assuming that they don't come with, assuming that they don't come with an obligation, one of the red flags of second citizenship that I mentioned, which most of them don't. But that's something to consider if you're out there and you have ancestry from one of those countries. Now, one thing that's been of increasing interest to me, both on a professional level and personal interest level, is American dual citizenship. Okay, what I mean by American dual citizenship is Americans who are dual citizens. So people who are dual citizens have 2, 3, or 4 or more citizenships, one of which is American. And the reason that I'm interested in it is obviously because of some of the unique qualities of it, right? Recently, the most commonly known, quality is of course, the fact that America has citizenship-based taxation, okay, which is obviously one of the big red flags. But generally, American dual citizenship is kind of unique for the wider, more overarching reason that as far as nation state willingness and ability to impose and enforce extraterritorial obligations, the United States is kind of in a league of its own because it has great willingness to do so and great ability to do so through its network of treaties and kind of information. I guess I'd call it information sharing cudgels that it has with other countries. So American dual citizens kind of have more, they kind of have unique things to think about when it comes to basically, navigating the world in terms of kind of not being subject to American jurisdiction. American jurisdiction seems to be able to follow American citizens And not just American citizens too, as we're seeing, but more effectively than anywhere else. So that's kind of a unique thing. Obviously, I'm big fan of John Richardson and Anthony Parent and the IRS Medic podcast. Give them a shout out. If you guys, I assume probably everybody here knows about them, but if not, you should check them out. They're really good about going into some of these aspects of American dual citizenship, I'd say. Um, Another thing I wanted to talk about, which it seems like more people are becoming hip to, but still there's kind of a denialism going around, or not going around, but basically that exists, which is um, people. It seems like people don't really grasp that any country, every country, I would say, has its ups and downs and eventually goes through crisis. Okay. The fortunes of nation states are cyclical. Okay. And the cycle's not really that long. We're not talking about usually hundreds of years until a country that's up goes down or a country that's down goes up. We're usually talking about a century or even less than a century or even several, revolutions in the cycle within a century. And this is a really important thing, in my opinion, really important thing to understand, recognize, learn from history. If you're thinking about long-term freedom of movement and sovereignty and what the meaning of dual citizenship is, because so many people, I have this happen all the time. People book consults with me. Like I said, they have access, or they may have access to citizenship by descent in a poor country or a vilified country, what I call a naughty country to the West, and they dismiss the eligibility offhand. They say, no, well, I've never lived there anywhere anyway. I'm a citizen of the United States. There's no reason, there's no need. And it doesn't really take looking back that far in history to see how many countries that were on top all of a sudden were not on top, whether it be temporarily or permanently, right? I had a guy, it wasn't a consul, but somebody that I knew. His father was born, his grandparents were born in Poland. He was born in South American country. And his father didn't go through the process to become recognized as a Polish citizen when he was born in the early 1950s because it wasn't attractive back then. It wasn't that big of a deal. It wasn't, people couldn't really see the benefit of it, right? Well, fast forward to 2024, obviously, Poland's a member of the European Union right now. And Polish citizenship is valuable. It's sought after. People who have Polish citizenship can live, work, open a business in the entire European Union, and of course, the Polish citizenship has strong visa-free access as well. So that's just one example, but there's many examples. And the other thing is, people, countries don't necessarily, a fall from grace doesn't necessarily mean a long, permanent or semi-permanent prolonged fall from grace. Sometimes there's just a crisis. There's a crisis that flares up and it can last for a few years, and you need that freedom of movement in those few years. And then maybe the crisis boils over, it passes over. That's even in that case, the citizenship matters, even if it's a citizenship from like I said, a so-called third world country or a weak country, right? There's this concept that I call the bridging residency. Okay, I call that a benefit of second citizenship, the bridging residency. What I mean by that is, if you're in your country, your home country, it undergoes some sort of crisis, you want to get out. You want to get out. You need to get out. You want to get out for a few years, a few months, or let's say permanently. Well, exits close on countries typically, okay, when that country is in crisis. Other countries recognize when a country's in crisis, and they don't want to be dealing with the refugee crisis themselves. So, there's a number of ways that exits close. Sometimes they close internally from the country. Country tries to trap its own citizens in. Sometimes exits close externally on the border. Okay, so for example, if it was the United States, let's say if the U.S. ever falls into some great crisis, Mexico and Canada temporarily close its borders. Another way exits close is that foreign countries stop accepting visa applications. They suspend visa applications for citizens of your country. Another way that exits close is that a foreign country suspends entry of citizens from your country to that country. Let's say you already have the visa, but the other country suspends the entry of nationals from your country. Another one is that sometimes foreign countries close their consulates in your country when your country is in crisis. So all these things happen, and again, a recurring issue I come up with. I'm not trying to dunk on clients or people who have consultations. Obviously, this is a very, very narrow, specialized area of knowledge. So I don't fault people for not knowing this, but these are just really common misconceptions that I see. People often assume that if their country falls into a terrible state, either suddenly or gradually, that they'll have access to apply for other residencies and visas under the same conditions that they have today. And it's not the case. The exits close, they contract typically. So, what I call the bridging residency, right, is the second citizenship as the ability to just get out of Dodge, get out of the place that's dangerous, or that you can't be or you don't want to be, that's in crisis, get to your second country of citizenship. Okay, and now you're in that other country, right? In this case, you're using it as a form of a springboard, and you can leisurely apply for whatever residency or visa in the other country that you actually wanted to live in was, right? That's another thing, that's another common um, you know, I wouldn't call it a misconception, but it seems to be a lesser known or lesser discussed aspect about dual citizenship that I think matters. And it's another reason why, like I said, especially in the absence of those red flags, if you have eligibility for citizenship in another country, especially if it's by descent, the general bias should be, in my opinion, to get it. Again, accepting the presence of one of those other red flags. Okay, let me take a look here. Do I need to check anything? Do I need to check on anything to see if people are requesting to speak, or does a notification automatically come up? If anybody knows that, I'd appreciate if people could let me know. I'm gonna check. Anybody want to speak? Feel free to come on up.
I'll speak if no one else is speaking.
Go ahead.
I'm half Irish American, so you guys give me the floor, I'm gonna take it. Um, uh, I'm gonna take exactly what you said, Parvis, and also reflect it back on the United States, because I think this is super important and is going to get increasingly important over the next 5 years, and that is it's the concept that you've always spoken about, actually, which is document dependence. And in the United States, if you're looking for citizenship by descent, again, kind of what I do, but also residency by investment, or just that collection of documents that you need to assemble, it's like it's its own project when you do that. It's sometimes it can take 6 months, sometimes it can take 5 years, particularly if a global pandemic happens. But the point is, you have to assemble just this litany of documents like legally that are legally enforceable, right? That they carry legal weight. In order to collect all these things, you have to go, particularly in the United States, to a bevy of government institutions to get them authenticated appropriately. And every single step of that has the ability or the potential for one bureaucrat to say, nope, office is closed for 3 months, or the processing times on these are 6 months. And it blows up your timeline, and the world can change in that amount of time. And I speak to that from very personal experience. Um, uh, I'm sure everyone on here who has done any research knows that in the United States, the biggest hurdle for collecting, old documents from ancestors, or research, even research, comes from some of the, federal government archives, particularly the ones at USCIS. And the timelines on those in 2019, which unfortunately is now 6 years ago, holy smokes. But typically those timelines were somewhere around 6 months. And because of the pandemic, because of all this growing interest, because of USCIS is just understaffed and overtaxed in terms of their, bureaucratic mandate or administrative mandate, those timelines have gone to 14 months. And standing 3 weeks out from a change in political administration, that has the potential to go even higher. And so I have clients come to me and they say, I have zero information about this great ancestor. How do I get their research, or how do I research their immigration history? And I tell them it's two requests that cannot happen concurrently, and they're each 14 months. So the minimum you're looking at to have everything assembled is 28 months. And in most cases, in order to file, particularly if it's not a consular process, but if it's a legal filing to obtain a citizenship by descent, you have to have all the paperwork in the filing. And so, you know, you have a 28-month lead time to then file in a European legal system, which at best is 6 months on top of that. So, immediately off the bat, if everything happens appropriately, you're looking at close to 3 years worth of processing. And that's if you're diligent and stay on top of it. And most people lose interest before then because it just seems too onerous. So, um, looking at kind of the benefits and the pitfalls of the entire project management perspective of obtaining a citizenship by descent, which you are technically legally entitled to should you be eligible, um, is a total document dependence. um, to shift that slightly from citizenship by descent to residency, um, I would argue Panama is a great example. I spent some time in Panama a couple years ago. Met many people who were born in the Panama Canal Zone when it was still U.S. sovereignty, and when it was announced by Jimmy Carter, pouring one out for old JC. When he announced the handover, there was that lead time before the handover. Everyone who was Panamanian who was born in the Panama Canal suddenly got their American citizenship. And if you go down there, there will be people walking around the streets who have a U.S. citizenship because they happen to be born in one place, and suddenly it wasn't a crisis, but suddenly the window of that opportunity was put on the calendar, and they assembled their legal situation to make that claim. But in Panama currently, if you get residency in Panama, um, and you decide that you do want to live there, even if you live there full time, to be able to come to build and naturalize as a Panamanian citizen. I personally know 6 or 7 Americans who have Panamanian residency, have lived there a decade, and they cannot get citizenship because legally they're entitled to it. They're entitled to being heard in front of a judge, but the bureaucratic culture there basically says, we don't like a lot of foreigners, particularly wealthy ones, and they just won't even give you. They won't even give you the time of day. Your application will literally sit on someone's desk indefinitely until change in political administration, and then suddenly you have to refile, and then it sits on someone else's desk for another 4 years. So there is a huge aspect of document dependency, and then actual administrative action on behalf of governments that doesn't always exist, even in times of non-crisis. And I think getting a good sense of that from practitioners who see this and monitor it um, can be really valuable, especially if you're making long-term plans. So I'll leave it there, but that's a big issue I care a lot about. So I think it's important to understand it.
Oh, Patrick, you know how to really hit on the topics that get my goat. So just a couple things. First of all, regarding document dependence, absolutely chronically underestimated aspect of getting any citizenship, but especially citizenship by descent, is people don't really grasp how long and how difficult it can be to get these documents. And sometimes you can't get the document. I mean, marriage certificate from 1910, even in the United States, sometimes they're lost. So that's really important. I have my own little cheesy line. I'm sure I've tweeted it here at least 50 times, which is if you're getting vital documents of yourself or your ancestors, if there's a stamp, seal, and fee, you should probably order 3. Get them in triplicate. Get them in triplicate so you don't ever have to get those documents again for the rest of your life. Use one for your process, keep the other 2, give it to your kids, other family members, keep it for future processes that you might need. So you're absolutely right. I mean, that's in times of non-crisis. And also, the more demand there are for things, the more expensive they become, right? And Patrick, you probably know where I'm going with this, which is the certificate of non-existence issued by USCIS up until last year. So this is just to go back for a minute. Certificate of non-existence can be helpful, and sometimes it's necessary for certain citizenship by descent processes to prove, let's say you're an American applicant, that your ancestor, your qualifying ancestor, did not naturalize in the United States. You're trying to prove a negative, right? Because you're trying to prove that they didn't sever their citizenship with that other country before the next generation was born. One way of trying to do that is to get a certificate of non-existence of naturalization record from USCIS. Up until, I can't remember if it was last year or this year. It was April of either this year or last year. I can't remember. Certificate of non-existence, $0, zero to apply for it. I was applying for them left and right. I applied for them for my clients that didn't even ask for them, just to give it to them for their records. It was a one-page application and it was free. Well, it's not free anymore. USCIS made a fee update, and it's not just it went from $0 to $5 or $20 or $50. It went from $0 to $335 per certificate of non-existence, right? So if you snoozed on that, you lose. Obviously, you lost. So that's a big issue. And then again, the certified copies, the apostilles, okay, which is this whole other process. These are things that take a lot of time, like Patrick said, even when it's not a time of crisis. Other thing I want to just touch on real quickly, and then I'll yield the floor to anybody else who wants to speak, Patience is Alpha or whoever else. Panama, okay, Panama naturalization or non-naturalization of residents. Anybody who's going through the process, who's researching, who's reading, who's consuming content by influencers on YouTube, about second citizenship or getting a residency that leads to citizenship has to understand that the right to something is not the same as the thing itself. The right to something is not as valuable as the thing itself. Why? Because you have to put energy into the right. You have to assert it to get the thing. Okay. You have to put energy in application, a lawsuit, bureaucratic processes, whatever it may be. So the fact that a person, if somebody's being sold on, or even if you're selling yourself on, and it's not necessarily always, nefarious marketing by people in the space. If you're selling yourself on a residency with the sole purpose of naturalizing in that foreign country and becoming a citizen, you have to understand that even if the letter of the law says that you have naturalization eligibility after 5 years of continuous residence or 3 years or 7 years, that's not a guarantee. It's far from a guarantee. Okay. It's oftentimes the bureaucratic culture is such that the letter of the law says that a person can apply to naturalize, but they don't actually do it. Or they do it with difficulty, right? And that's not even discussing when there's changes along the way in that path. Okay, the longer that path is, and I have an article which I titled called "The Hidden Threats to Your Citizenship," and one of the concepts that I talk about is time as your enemy if you are trying to get residency, to wait out a period of time to naturalize. And why I call it your enemy is because there's attack vectors that you become subjected to by waiting that period of time. What attack vectors? A change in legislation, a change in regulation, a change in administration of the country that you want to naturalize in, an informal change, okay, in the requirements, and an informal narrowing. What I mean by that, no change in the letter of the law, the regulation, but there's just a new boss of the Ministry of Interior or whatever. And he's decided that we're going to slow down these naturalizations. We've been giving them out like candy. Now, this is the new requirement, informal narrowing of the requirements. The residency program ending, okay, that can happen. There was a big threat with Portugal RBI that happened last year. That was a big scare for people that got residency by investment with the idea of getting naturalized later. So all this is to say, you have to understand, everybody has to understand that the right to something, naturalization eligibility after 5 years, is not as valuable as the thing itself. Always keep those two things distinct. I guess a more pithy way to say it is a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, right? There is not a substitute for you can't substitute having the thing with just a path towards the thing, okay, that and a promise. Okay, so I just wanted to touch on that. Beautifully said by Patrick. Agree with everything you said there. Patience is alpha. You're up. You got anything to say? Hello, hello. Patience, are you there? Okay. I'm not sure if Patience is having technical difficulties or maybe not ready to speak. Whenever you're ready to speak, just hop in and interrupt me. I'm going to continue on here, right? Um, the other thing that I just wanted to talk about, and I know I rail on. I'm a broken record about this concept on Twitter, which is passport is not citizenship. They are two distinct things. And to many people, I think that statement might sound like pedantry or being nitpicky or making a trite statement or an obvious statement, but I really don't believe that it is. It's really a very important distinction to make, both conceptually, practically, and then obviously when you're talking about different things. And the reason is that there are sincere, real passport issues that are not citizenship issues that people deal with, right? And then there are citizenship issues that don't have to do with the passport that people deal with, right? And if you conflate the two or use them interchangeably, you can't. Nobody really knows exactly what a person is talking about, right? So, a passport is generally, right, and we're dealing in heuristics here, an ID, a travel document, and sometimes rebuttable proof of a person's citizenship. Okay, so a passport is number one, an ID, number two, a travel document, and number three, sometimes rebuttable proof of a person's citizenship. Okay, what do I mean by that last statement? Okay, well, a passport that's issued to rebuttable proof of a person's citizenship in the United States. Okay, why do I say it's rebuttable? Okay, because it can be rebuttable. Okay, the passport could be issued in error. It could be a fraudulent passport. It could be a passport that's issued to a person that then renounced U.S. citizenship, right? Or it could even be the case. I mean, there's even cases where a person is thought to have been born a citizen, okay, but then they came, 50 years later on, 50 years on, they come under the scrutiny of USCIS and Department of State later on, and it's found that hey, their parent was actually in the United States as a diplomat when they were born. You actually were not a citizen from birth. That person had a U.S. passport their whole life, okay, and they used it as proof of citizenship. Okay, so a passport it's not the thing. At best, it's a symbol of the thing. It's a concept of the thing, and it's. I see all kinds of errors, mistakes, and understanding just constantly. And I know I'm swimming against the tide in talking about this and saying you shouldn't call a citizenship a passport, because 95% of people online do, including people in the mobility space, other people that are mobility professionals. But the more we develop, the more the space develops, dual citizenship, multiple citizenship, I think it's going to become more apparent how distinct the issues are that arise with passports and with citizenships, right? A passport is something that might become anachronistic in just a few decades. We could argue citizenship might also become anachronistic if the nation's or whenever the nation state system is challenged. But a passport is a it's the travel document. It's the standard travel document that's used nowadays to allow people to cross controlled borders. Okay, I think it's really important to make that distinction. And the other beef that I have with using the two interchangeably is that citizenship is a really complex issue. Okay, and when people refer to it as a passport, or they allow themselves to think about it as being a passport, it implies that a thing a legal concept that's extremely complex and nuanced is much more simpler than it actually is. And I think that makes people run into problems. Jimmy Sexton, the tax lawyer, had a great post on LinkedIn a few weeks ago, I think it was, where he's talked about one of his clients, American citizen, who was under the impression that he wasn't a citizen anymore because his passport, his American passport, had expired years, maybe it was even a decade or more earlier, and the person had not used it anymore. That's a great example of somebody who, because of the fuzziness and the conflation of their mind of what a passport is and what a citizenship was, is obviously sorely mistaken, okay, about what their status was vis-a-vis citizenship in the United States. So this is something, I really think that the distinction of these two concepts is bedrock. It's absolutely bedrock to any discussion about multiple citizenship. If you get this wrong, every other discussion that layers on top of this is going to be wrong. This is a distinction that's upstream of all other discussion about the matters. Citizenship is citizenship. Legal relationship between it's an ephemeral legal concept. Okay, between the United States between a country and a person. And the passport is, like I said, the ID, travel document, and sometimes rebuttable proof of that citizenship. So that's it. I'll try not to rant more on that point. I know I'm really a broken record on that, but it's because I really think that much disservice is done to people's understanding of how to order and plan their own sovereignty and freedom of movement by conflating these two terms. So I'm done on that rant. Okay, Patience is Alpha requested again, and let's let him come up here and say a few things. Okay, one moment. All right, there you are. Patience, you should be live. Patience, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Can you guys hear me? I think you can. Yeah, sorry about that technical difficulties. Uh, it, um, it was really interesting what Patrick just mentioned a few minutes ago with regard to the complexity of gathering documents. I think there's rather like one of the behaviors that I noticed around people around me, because I'm part of I'm part of an international school, a lot of nationalities. One of the common themes uh, in that community is the hey, I now live in the US. I'm now American, but my parents are from XYZ country. And then sometimes, because I'm curious, sometimes I ask, "Oh, are you also a citizen of that country?" And oftentimes the answer is, "No, I'm not. I just know my father, my there's a there's a common theme of procrastinations in terms of gathering document or getting the processes started, or actually getting the citizenship recognized, which eventually leads to years and complexities in getting that status to be having that status. It's something that I've noticed in my personal.
Patience is Alpha. We can't really hear you anymore. It looks like there might be a weak connection on your part. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you?
Yes, now we can. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. So I've noticed that it's especially hard for people that do not have an actual connection to the country. Either they don't speak the language, or they don't understand how to navigate the administration. Um, and it is a risk if parents do not actually go and do the paperwork for them.
It looks like we can't hear you again, Patience. So I'm going to piggyback on what you just mentioned, actually. So yes, I absolutely agree. That's a great point, right? A couple things. So first of all, a lot of people don't understand that acquisition of citizenship by descent automatic acquisition happens by operation of law, right? No forms necessary, right? Maybe you have never been to that foreign country that your parent was born in. You never submitted a form to them. Technically, if you acquired if you acquired citizenship automatically at birth, it happened by operation of law. You're already technically a citizen. Now, in that case, the application is to be recognized as a citizen. And in practice, of course, in order to actually observe any benefits of that citizenship, typically you have to actually go through a process to actually, be recognized as such. But you raise a great point, Patience. And a couple days ago, or maybe it was yesterday, I made a tweet about the Iranian diaspora, just from my own personal experience, which is a lot of kids that were born to Iranian citizens abroad, especially in the United States, don't end up really speaking the language when they grew up. Okay, so even being able to have a casual conversation. So the prospect of downloading forms in Persian, the Persian language, gathering the documentation, filling it out, making an appointment, and showing up there in person to submit this documentation and speak in Persian is really daunting. Now, if that prospective applicant for recognition of citizenship is on the younger side, then yeah, sure, their parents can help them, and they do. And sometimes the parents even do it for them, right? But if that person is exploring that option and they're 35, 40, 45, 50, the parents might not be capable anymore. They may not be alive anymore, right? And that creates a friction. Now, obviously, there's professionals and people that can be hired, to assist. But that's an extra unknown and an extra friction. And a lot of people, I'd venture to say even the majority of people, are just not very comfortable hiring a lawyer or a genealogist like Patrick, to help them. It's just something that's they might do it, but it's an extra obstacle, not just financially, but sometimes just emotionally. So yeah, Patience. I assume where you're going with that is that the sooner the better. Act quickly if you have eligibility for a foreign citizenship based on descent. And if that's the point that you're making, then yes, I would absolutely agree 100%. Okay, I'm going to keep going. I think I'm probably going to go for about another 20 minutes or so, unless we really catch a wind if people want to talk. But I'm going to keep going, and if anybody wants to jump in, jump in. Just interrupt me, stop me, and would love to hear from anybody else that wants
Yeah,
to
I
speak.
got a quick
Go ahead.
anecdote, and that is always remember that think about how confusing an immigration process is or a citizenship by descent process is now for you, for any candidate, and then consider their ancestor 2, 3 generations ago, who probably didn't speak English as a first language and was found it equal as confusing or more. And so there's very many instances where you go back through the historic record and you find out your ancestor arrived in this country at, give a date, I'll give a date like 1948, just post World War II. And then suddenly they have an immigration record where they went over and spent a day in Canada, and they use that as their official immigration date because they didn't get the right form when they showed up in the first place. And so there's all of these instances where, you know, the person's ancestor or parent was operating, kind of by the seat of their pants with the best of their ability and possibly a lawyer at the time, but it leaves behind like this record that you kind of still have to piece together. And, um, you know, when it comes to patience and getting the documents, sometimes it involves a history lesson. And not everyone is hyper comfortable with that on top of that, because not only may they not hire someone to acquire this document or information, but they also have to make sure they hire the right person, because the right person may not know, oh, your ancestor derived citizenship from their previous ancestry, therefore you may not be eligible. And, a lot of times, particularly in the mobility space, everyone says, oh yeah, you have an Italian ancestor. I'm big on the Italian ancestry stuff. Oh, you have an Italian ancestor? Oh, perfect. Go get your Italian citizenship. And it's like, oh, it's not that. It's not that. That's very flippant, right? It's you have to understand the citizenship status of your ancestor at the time, and then on top of that, did your ancestor understand it as well? Because chances are they probably didn't, and you have to reverse engineer their status at some given time in order to make the claim, and then structure it in a way that you can potentially communicate it to a consular officer if you're going that route, which is, a consular officer probably speaks Italian as their first language in this example, English as a second language, and now you're explaining this complicated legal concept from the 1920s or the 1940s to them, and they either know it or they don't, and they don't want to spend more than 30 seconds being taught it, right? There's a famous Winston Churchill quote, I'm always willing to learn, but I'm very rarely willing to be taught. And I think that is enormously true when it comes to um, archive people or consular officers. And it heightens the burden on you because you have to be able to take all of this information and put it in a very easy and consumable manner so that someone can issue a stamp of approval on it. Um, and I can go on and on with different examples about that for hours, but I
Oh, great
think,
point.
yeah,
Go
I think
ahead.
that's cool. Yeah, I mean, not to get too in the weeds, but like there was a period of time where the citizenship status was determined by the male of the family. So a marriage certificate was super important because it signified the status of a female ancestor and their citizenship status. Some countries still acknowledge that, others see that as punitive against women, and so therefore it doesn't legally stand for citizenship by descent. Um, there was a time period in the United States when women got the right to vote, um, with with our amendment process, and then they went to show up to vote, and they realized they weren't technically an American citizen because they had married someone who was not yet naturalized, and so that was corrected with the Hatch Act in 1922, and so there's this like time period where your female ancestor might have been born in America, been third, fourth, fifth generation American, but wasn't an American citizen during this time period. And you have to be able to prove that to a consular officer. Now, most citizenship by descent will say, yeah, that's pretty punitive against women, and in modern sensibilities, like we understand this, and therefore this is an exception. But you know, consular officers are people, and people are imperfect, and so sometimes that burden falls on you to be able to understand and explain that. Um, and I could use a handful of other examples, but you know, uh, finding that and communicating it in a thoughtful way is important. And also, I will, as a very last minute point, I will make is that if you have a citizenship by descent case and you are hiring a lawyer in a foreign country, not only do you want to ensure that the person you're hiring understands the concept that you're arguing, but feels comfortable and is motivated enough to argue that. And again, I'll use an Italian citizenship by descent example. Is that there's been a bunch of changes in the past year around this, particularly on the consular side. So it forces people to go into the legal side to make a claim for citizenship by descent. And the interesting thing is that there is a lot of lawyers who will take a filing fee plus, a fairly low cost of labor standard to take your case. But will they go in front of an Italian judge, who's probably only working 5 hours a day and has copious amounts of smoke breaks and just wants to process and say, oh, hey, here's this complicated legal theory where we had this person who expatriated from the United States despite having American citizenship. And therefore, when they had their children, they were an Italian citizen. Like, your lawyer may not make that case very well unless he understands the concept and he's properly motivated and he actually cares. And so I think there's a finding the right people to argue a case in that scenario is super important. And I think it's a concept that not everyone has really wrapped their heads around yet because it's still a little bit new.
Great point, Patrick. A lot of people flippantly say in this space, like you said, oh, you have an Italian ancestor. Yeah, you qualify for Italian citizenship. No, 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 no. Citizenship by descent eligibility analysis can often be, the more generations you have, a complicated cross-reference of the law of citizenship and residency of different countries at different times. So that's a fantastic example. And in fact, when you were talking, the one that came to my mind is people who are applying for Slovak and Hungarian citizenship by descent that are depending on basically an analysis of when their qualifying ancestor lost citizenship by virtue of continuous absence from the country, right? Before 1918, Slovakia was just part of the Hungarian pole of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And at the time, the law in Hungary was that 10 years of continuous absence result in automatic loss of citizenship, right? But there's some exceptions. It was that period was told supposedly if a person, or not told, renewed if a person came back to visit. That period of time was renewed if a person, wrote to a consulate and said that they wanted to keep their citizenship. That period of time was supposed to be suspended in wartime, and we had this little thing called World War I, of course, between 1914 and 1918. The proper analysis gets really complicated, and it's just not something that typically is that a person can make ad hoc generalizations about. You could generalize, oh, you may qualify. There's a good chance you qualify, but to actually nail down and actually get the answer, no, it requires some serious work. And yeah, I think that was great tips about finding obviously a professional that's motivated to make the arguments for you. One quick story that I thought of also while you were talking is that people don't know their own status, believe it or not. I had a consult a while ago of a lady, American citizen that was born in South America in the 1940s. And her father was Hungarian, okay? And she presented in her consult that she naturalized in the United States. Her mother was American, her father was Hungarian. She presented that she naturalized in the United States. She was interested in Hungarian citizenship by descent. So immediately my mind is going to, okay, well, was she born a Hungarian citizen, and did she possibly lose that citizenship by naturalizing in the United States? Lo and behold, I asked her for her documents. She didn't naturalize. She referred to her certificate of naturalization. She had no certificate of naturalization. She was born a citizen. She acquired U.S. citizenship at birth in that South American country. She had a consular report of birth abroad, and she had a certificate of citizenship, which is great. That boded excellently. That totally foreclosed the issue of having lost Hungarian citizenship that she acquired at birth by naturalizing elsewhere. But she had no clue. And this lady was in her, I don't know what, 70s, I guess? Yeah, 70s, late 70s or maybe 80s. She always thought that she naturalized in the United States. So you're absolutely right. People don't even know their own, not everybody, but sometimes. And she was a very sharp lady. This was no unsophisticated person. People don't know their own situation, and that's obviously something that is a practical matter. What it means for professionals or people that are pursuing this is you have to be skeptical of anything somebody tells you. Collect the information in the consult or whatever, but you really got to actually see the documents and see what it looks like happened. One other quick thing I just want to go over real quickly, a concept that just, again, pet peeve of mine. And so I have to address it because I think it kind of leads people astray, okay? Which is people don't, a lot of times, when I mean by people, I mean people in this industry, in the freedom of movement, multiple citizenship, sovereignty, influencing space, they don't account for different gradations of robustness of a residency right. What do I mean by robustness? I mean basically resistance to degradation, okay, of that right of residency somewhere. And automatically what I think about is basically residency unions, the European Union, okay? A person that gets citizenship in an EU country, right? It's commonly stated, it's commonly written, and it's generally right. That gives the person, if you get citizenship, let's say in Croatia, that gives you the right of residency in other EU countries as well as Croatia, right? But that right of residency in the other countries is not as robust as the right of residency in Croatia. Why? Because the former relies on treaties. It relies on a form of reciprocity by foreign countries. So I split the residency rights conceptually when I talk to clients into two categories, what I call the core residency right and the satellite residency right. Core residency right is you get citizenship in Croatia by descent or otherwise. That gives you the indefinite, immediate right to reside, live, work, study, open a business in Croatia. That's the core residency right. The satellite residency right is the right that Croatian citizenship gives you to be resident in another country in the EU. Okay, so that's the satellite right. Why do I distinguish? Because the latter is subject to a number of additional attack vectors that the former is not. Okay, Croatia could leave the Union. The other country could leave the Union. The Union could dissolve entirely. The other country could unlawfully restrict the person's right of residency in that country. These are all attack vectors on the satellite residency right that don't exist for the core residency right. And imagine, I mean, Brexit's a great example. Imagine if you got UK citizenship and you're relying on in 2015, you're relying on the right that it would give you right of residency in France, Croatia, Hungary, Spain, as robustly as it would give you the right of residency in the UK. Well, Brexit comes along now, and now you have a lesson in you no longer have the right of residency in those other EU countries because the UK left there, and then now you have a lesson in the difference in understanding basically the different gradations. First of all, just acknowledging and understanding that there are different gradations in robustness of a mobility right, whether it be a citizenship right or the right of residency that I just mentioned. So that's it. Okay, 12:10. Okay, anybody else want to come up and speak? Or Patrick, if you want to come up and speak again, would love to hear from you. We got John here, we got Jerry, we got Roland. Feel free, anybody who wants to speak or disagree or whatever.
Yeah, I'll throw in a little X factor. There's this concept I'm exploring recently, and I think it is the event driven or long-term event driven potential, or being opportunistic with these movements. And I'll give you two examples. One is Brexit. We see that as a degradation of the British citizenship and its associated travel rights through its physical passport, right? Um, and there's trade and investment implications as well, but I'll leave those aside. However, the flip side of that coin is that was a absolute boon to the benefits of Irish citizenship because of their um, you know their associated treaties with Northern Ireland. It was called the Irish Backdoor, which is potentially a unfortunate name, but like the concept was that you had residency rights in Northern Ireland for Irish citizenship. So you got the benefits of an EU passport. I'm sorry, an EU citizenship. Uh, EU citizenship and the residency benefits associated with having a shared border with the United Kingdom. So that's one example. The other one um, is the potential, and I'm going to hit on this as one of my. There's nobody talking about this. I think it's super interesting when it comes out, but it's going to be this Canadian citizenship bill C-71 as it pertains to Canadian citizenship loosely by descent. It's not a iure sanguinis law. It's more of a softer form of the ability to pass on Canadian citizenship. And when that happens, I believe that the policy implications from the United States will change, right? And so the benefits or the responsibilities of say a Canadian citizenship may change as it relates to the United States because of this change in legislation. So I think if one were to, we all look at these as like a window of opportunity because of document dependence and the ability to make these claims over a period of time. However, if we change that from a look back perspective to a look forward perspective, there exists potential changes that are that can potentially even be opportunistic or accommodative for enhancing your claims to another citizenship. And I think having the 360 view, the complete 360 view is really valuable, particularly on New Year's Day when we're talking about the potential options from now and into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I'm also very curious to see what happens with that Canadian citizenship by descent bill, and whether that could affect, the dual citizenship exit tax exemption in Section 877 of the IRC. By the reading of the statute, it appears that the exception should only qualify to people who, in fact, were dual citizens at the time of their birth. And the Canadian citizenship by descent bill, it appears to me, and I don't want to speak out of turn, so I should probably review again before I have a strong opinion on this, but it appears to me to kind of be making a claim that those descendants were in fact citizens of Canada when they were born, even though this law or this bill is being passed now. If that is the legal posture that the Canadian citizenship bill has, then I'm very curious to know what's going to happen to somebody who is considered a Canadian citizen under that bill, dual American Canadian citizen, fulfills the 5-year tax residency requirement, and tries to renounce. Are they going to have a decent argument for exemption from the exit tax or not? And the first person I think about is Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a Canadian citizen. His kids should not be, because he's the first generation that was born abroad, and he's the richest man in the world, and he's got 10 kids. So I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if one of those kids might end up being a guinea pig, 10 or 20 or 30 years from the future. So I don't know. Those are just thoughts. But yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Patrick. Obviously, there's so many consequences that come out of positive and negative that come from just the interaction of these different citizenships. And this is where I think this is the area that I think is super nascent, the world of multiple citizenship and mobility. It's super new. It's free. It's not exactly just immigration, right? Immigration, domestic immigration is well developed. The law, the concepts. There's plenty of very, very talented professionals, U.S. immigration lawyers, UK immigration lawyers. But what we're dealing with here is kind of another thing that incorporates a lot of the concepts. It's obviously related, but it also incorporates topics and concepts that don't have that much treatment, that much rigorous analysis, research, and discussion. And that's very exciting to me. That's kind of, I look at this like, nascent blue ocean industry that's growing. It's increasing interest to people. And yeah, it's great. All right. Anybody else? John, you want to come up here? Or are you just in listening mode? Okay. Maybe John's fine. John's in listening mode. He puts out a prodigious amount of content, so we'll give him a break here. He's always putting out super duper content. I highly recommend everybody check out John Richardson's podcast. He has his own podcast, and he's obviously a key member of the IRS Medic podcast as well. So, okay, so we've been going for about an hour, 17 minutes here. Does anybody have any questions or topics, or even if they don't want to speak, is there anything else that somebody would like me to talk more about, or anything at all before we wrap up for the day? All right, I think that's it. Well, thank you everybody for joining. That was fun. This was the first one, and I think I had enough fun here to do a second one. So I'll pick a topic. If you have any ideas for topics, throw them into the comment section here, and I'll pick one, and I'll schedule another spaces for maybe a couple of days from now, so we can dive into another topic related to mobility, multiple citizenship, et cetera, et cetera. That's it. Thank you, everybody. Have a great one. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everyone.